Dana White has planned to make sure the UFC show goes on, saying this to ESPN's Brett Okamoto on Monday. Quote, "I've also secured an island. I've got an island. The infrastructure is being built right now. We're going to do all of our international fights on this island. When we do this fight on April 18th, international and U.S., we're going to start cranking. The UFC will be back up and running internationally and in the United States." White also said he had the card locked up for 2 months and that he was going to continue to pump the fights out. Max, he has been bullish about this, that they are not slowing down. What message, Max, do you think Dana's sending right now?
I actually think it's a good one. He's being aggressive. He's being nimble with the organization. I've known Dana for almost 20 years, and I can tell you from the very beginning, he was very ambitious in a way that I thought, boy, maybe he can do what he thinks he can do, but it's going to take a lot of time, and he did it in less than half the time I thought it would take him. In this case, even the optics are okay, because he's saying all the fighters for UFC 249 are going to get COVID tests. Well, how's that coronavirus? How's that possible, right, where all these tests are needed? He figured out a way to secure these tests. Good for him. Now, you may say there's an ethical question here, because we need these tests. We need to isolate the virus. And that's true. You can grapple with that ethical question. Is it right ethically to take tests for people who just, you don't know whether or not they have it? If they were to isolate themselves, they wouldn't be at risk for infecting other people. But the optics are much different than, say, the NFL or the NBA or Major League Baseball, especially the NFL and Major League Baseball, who need thousands of tests, over 1,000 tests. You don't need that for a one-on-one sport where you're going to do a skeleton crew and strip it all down and isolate them. So even the optics are better here. And by the way, even UFC 249, Gaethje, you better be ready in the UFC to go. In the middle of a pandemic, Nurmagomedov can't make it because of international restrictions on travel and such. So the champion can't fight as number 1 contender. Okay, who's up next? Is number 2 available? 3? Okay, the number 4 contender. Great, let's have a fight. Let's have a show. Number 1 versus number 4, even if the champion can't make it. So I like it a lot. I think that boxing promoters and organizers of golf events and any athletic competition that involves relatively few participants and can be done by acquiring a relatively small number of tests, I think those organizers should look into it and very much look into what Dana here is doing.
Max Kellerman, I don't disagree with anything that you're saying. Both you and I have known Dana White for a very, very long time. We're both incredibly fond of him. I love the guy, and I love what he's doing. I don't disagree with anything. But as a friend, what I would caution him to do is to pay attention to things from an optics perspective, Max. And guess why I would say that? Dare I say, Max, it would be because of people like yourself and others. Not about Dana White per se as it pertains to UFC 249 and beyond, but just the optics overall because of the times that we're living in. Dana White spoke at the Republican National Convention. He has been on the record saying he would never say a negative word about the president. He is obviously a staunch supporter of the president, and there are an abundance of people, including yourself, privately, publicly, and otherwise, who have been critical of the president in terms of the verbiage coming out of his mouth at this particular moment in time. So when you're gung-ho about going and being steadfast in your approach to make sure that there's a UFC 249 event and you're dogged about it, if you give the impression at all that you're ignoring, and keep in mind, neither yourself nor I are even suggesting that Dana White and the UFC is doing such a thing, because we know he's not, by virtue of the details that evolve around what he's doing to put this event together. We know he's not ignoring it. We know he's not being tone deaf. We know he's paying attention to it, but he also understands that at some point in time, we're going to have to move forward. In the end, though, because of critics out there who will take his association with a president that they have unapologetically vilified, particularly during this coronavirus situation, where we've seen the president go up there and speak on issues some people, at least, have challenged whether or not he should be speaking at all about those issues. The bottom line is you never know how that gets attached to Dana White as he's trying to put this event together, and he's being accused of being tone deaf. So I would say to him, be careful about that. Move forward. Do what you're doing, but monitor the terrain optically so you make sure that you're saying and disseminating the right kind of message as you move forward. That's the only thing that I'm saying. I'm not saying anything else, and I'm certainly, Max, not disagreeing with anything that you outlined, because you're right. I totally agree with you about what he's doing here.
Whatever political affiliations Dana has, I'm judging that separately from this. There's no debate among serious people the disastrous response of the executive branch of our federal government to coronavirus. It's been a disaster. But whatever Dana's opinion is about that, it's really not. Whatever Dana's opinion is about that is separate, I think, from this. Now, the question, as I mentioned, ethically, is how do you justify testing or getting your hands on tests for people who are not showing symptoms, who could otherwise be social distancing and self-quarantining at this time? I actually think there's a strong argument for doing so. You say, well, we desperately need these tests. When you're talking about an extremely small number of tests, and it's providing diversion in a time of crisis, which has always been seen, as I constantly refer to during the Second World War, when Major League Baseball didn't know what to do, FDR said, no, we need Major League Baseball now. If you're absorbing a very small number of resources in order to provide that diversion, I think you have a basis for an argument there. But even so, it's much better optically for the UFC to do it than, say, for baseball or football to do it, where they would need literally thousands of tests.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming, sports, and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.